October 4th, 1951, Joe's Elbow Room, Cliffside Park, New Jersey. 11:28 in the morning. 4 men sat at a corner table, laughing in Italian. Coffee cooled in white ceramic cups. A waitress walked toward the kitchen with their order, the sound of her footsteps absorbed by the empty restaurant. Outside, the Palisades cliffs dropped away toward the Hudson River, Manhattan gleaming across the water like a promise that belonged to someone else. Willie Moretti was telling a joke. He always told jokes. It was what made him different from the stone-faced enforcers who haunted New Jersey's gambling dens and New York's shadowy back rooms. Willie smiled. Willie charmed. Willie knew every cop, every politician, every club owner from Bergen County to the Bronx, and they all knew him back because he made them laugh, even as he made them rich. The gunshots came without warning. Multiple shots fired in rapid succession. The reports echoed off tile and plaster, sharp and final, as a judge's gavel. When the waitress rushed back into the dining room, Willie Moretti was on the floor, lying on his back, bullet wounds to his face and head. The other men were gone, fled through the door like smoke, already ghosts before the body cooled. The coffee was still warm in the cups. This is the story of how a man who made people laugh died for the words that came out of his mouth. But to understand why Willie Moretti had to die, you have to understand the world that built him. The world where loyalty was currency, silence was survival, and charm could be the most dangerous weapon of all. The years after Prohibition ended in 1933 should have been a reckoning. For 2 decades, organized crime had grown fat on illegal alcohol, building empires on bootlegging routes that stretched from Canadian borders to Gulf Coast docks. But when the 21st Amendment made liquor legal again, the men who'd spent 13 years perfecting the art of organized distribution didn't just pack up and go home. They pivoted, they evolved, and the territory they claimed wasn't geographic anymore. It was economic, psychological, political. New Jersey in the late 1930s and 1940s was a gold mine wrapped in corruption. The Garden State sat between New York and Philadelphia, a corridor of opportunity where money moved and cops looked the other way if you greased the right palms. The gambling rackets alone pulled in millions. Dice games and back alleys, card rooms and basement clubs, bookmaking operations that took bets on every horse race, every boxing match, every sporting event from coast to coast. Slot machines lined the walls of bars and restaurants, each one feeding a steady stream of quarters into syndicate coffers. And controlling much of that flow was a man named Guarino Moretti. Willie to his friends, Willie Moore to the cops and the press. A Calabrian immigrant who'd arrived in America as a child and learned early that the streets rewarded the quick and the ruthless. Willie Moretti was born February 24th, 1894, in Bari, Apulia, in southern Italy. His family brought him to America before the turn of the century, settling in the cramped tenements of northern New Jersey, where Italian immigrants clustered together, speaking the dialect of the old country while trying to navigate the chaos of the new one. Young Willie grew up fast. By his late teens, he was running with a gang of Italian and Irish kids pulling small-time robberies, learning the rhythm of street crime, the adrenaline, the payoff, the constant calculation of risk versus reward. January 12, 1913. Willie Moretti, 19 years old, was convicted of robbery in New York City and sentenced to a year in state prison. He served only a few months. His age, his clean record, the relative minor nature of the crime, these things bought him leniency. But prison, even a short stint, was an education. He met career criminals. He learned the hierarchies, the codes, the unspoken rules that governed the underworld. When he walked out of those gates, He wasn't just Willie Moretti anymore. He was Willie Moretti who'd done time, and that meant something on the streets. He returned to the life, but smarter now, more disciplined, and he had connections. Growing up in northern New Jersey, he'd befriended the Costello brothers, Francesco Castiglia, who'd later become Frank Costello, and his brother Eddie. Frank was sharp, strategic. He saw angles other kids missed, opportunities in the chaos. Willie, on the other hand, was muscle, strong, fearless, willing to do the things Frank needed done without asking too many questions. It was a natural partnership. Frank was the brains. Willie was the enforcer. And together, they started building something. Through the teens and into the early 20s, Willie and Frank ran robberies, extortion schemes, burglaries, anything that paid. But everything changed in 1920. The Volstead Act made alcohol illegal, and overnight, organized crime found its golden goose. Bootlegging wasn't just profitable, it was astronomically profitable, and it required organization, logistics, protection, and ruthlessness. All things Willie Moretti had in abundance. By the mid-1920s, Frank Costello had aligned himself with a rising star in the New York underworld, Charlie "Lucky" Luciano. Luciano was different from the old guard Sicilian bosses. He didn't care about blood feuds or ancient grudges. He cared about money. And he understood that the future of organized crime wasn't ethnic purity. It was collaboration. Italians working with Jews, Jews working with Irish. Everybody carving out their piece of the pie without killing each other over scraps. Luciano brought together a who's who of future mob royalty. Meyer Lansky, Bugsy Siegel, Vito Genovese, Tommy Lucchese, and Frank Costello. And where Frank went, Willie followed. They joined the bootlegging operations of Giuseppe "Joe the Boss" Masseria, one of the most powerful Italian mob bosses in New York. Masseria controlled rackets in Manhattan and Brooklyn, and his organization was vast, violent, and obscenely profitable. Willie Moretti thrived in this world. His charm made him valuable. He could walk into a room full of cops and politicians and walk out with assurances that nobody would look too closely at the trucks rolling through Jersey in the dead of night, loaded with Canadian whiskey and Irish rum. He could mediate disputes between rival factions, keeping the peace long enough for everyone to make money. And when mediation failed, he could deliver the kind of violence that made men remember why cooperation was preferable to conflict. But the late 1920s brought war. The Castellamarese War, they called it, a bloody conflict between Masseria and a rival Sicilian boss named Salvatore Maranzano, each man claiming to be the rightful king of New York's Italian underworld. The war tore through the city, leaving bodies in the streets, disrupting business, drawing unwanted attention from law enforcement. The younger generation, Luciano, Costello, Lansky, Genovese, saw the war for what it was, bad for business. Old men clinging to old world thinking, letting pride and tradition destroy the machine they'd all built together. April 15th, 1931. Luciano made a decision. He betrayed Masseria, invited him to a restaurant in Coney Island, then walked away while gunmen rushed in and shot Masseria dead. The war didn't end with Maranzano taking control, though. September 10th, 1931, 5 months after Masseria's murder, Luciano had Maranzano killed too, and from the ashes of that bloodshed, Luciano built something new. He organized New York's Italian mob into 5 families, each with its own territory, its own leadership, its own rackets. And overseeing them all was the Commission, a board of directors for the underworld designed to prevent the kind of war that had nearly destroyed them all. Frank Costello became Luciano's consigliere, his top advisor, and Willie Moretti became a key underboss and enforcer. By the mid-1930s, Willie was one of the most powerful mobsters in New Jersey. He ran gambling dens throughout the state and into upstate New York, partnering with other major figures like Joe Adonis and Abner Longheads Willman. He lived in a large home in Hasbrook Heights, Bergen County, just outside New York City, and owned another property in Deal, down the Jersey Shore, a sprawling residence worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. He drove Cadillacs and Lincolns. He carried thousands in cash for daily expenses, and he did it all with a smile. But Willie Moretti's reach extended beyond gambling and extortion. He had another talent, spotting potential. And in the mid-1930s, he spotted it in a skinny kid from Hoboken with blue eyes and a voice that could make women weep. Frank Sinatra was nobody in 1935. A local singer trying to scratch out a living playing small clubs, barely making enough to support his new wife, Nancy Barbado. But Nancy's cousin, John Barbado, was one of Willie Moretti's associates. And through that connection, Sinatra came to Willie's attention. Willie liked the kid, saw something in him. So he helped, got him bookings in New Jersey clubs, places Willie controlled or influenced. In exchange, Sinatra kicked back a percentage of his earnings. It was a standard arrangement. Willie wasn't doing charity work, but he also wasn't just extracting tribute. He believed in Sinatra. He wanted to see him succeed. By 1939, Sinatra had signed a contract with band leader Tommy Dorsey. It was a big break, performing with one of the most popular big bands in America. But by the early 1940s, Sinatra had outgrown Dorsey. He was becoming a star in his own right, drawing screams from teenage girls, headlining sold-out shows. He wanted out of his contract to pursue solo opportunities. Dorsey refused. The contract was ironclad, and Dorsey wasn't letting his meal ticket walk away. According to legend, Sinatra turned to Willie Moretti for help. The story became infamous. Willie allegedly confronted Tommy Dorsey, jammed a gun barrel down his throat, and told him that if he didn't release Sinatra from the contract, he wouldn't live to conduct another song. Dorsey, terrified, sold Sinatra's contract for $1. Whether this actually happened remains disputed. Sinatra himself denied the gun incident throughout his life. Dorsey never publicly confirmed it. But the contract was sold. Sinatra became a superstar, and the story became part of American mythology, later inspiring the Johnny Fontaine storyline in Mario Puzo's The Godfather. The severed horsehead, the band leader who wakes up screaming, the offer he can't refuse. What is certain is that Willie Moretti's reputation as a man who could make problems disappear grew even larger, whether through actual violence or through the perception of his willingness to use it. In the late 1940s, Willie became friends with another pair of rising stars, comedians Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. They performed at Bill Miller's Riviera nightclub in Fort Lee, New Jersey, a venue Willie frequented and had financial interest in alongside Abner Longheads Willman. He liked them, made sure they got good treatment, invited them to family events. In 1947, Martin, Lewis, Sinatra, and comedian Milton Berle all performed at the wedding reception of Willie's stepsister. It was a lavish affair, the kind of celebration that blurred the line between legitimate entertainment and underworld power. But beneath Willie's charm and his celebrity friendships, there was something darker happening. Something medical. Something that would eventually seal his fate. By 1950, it was being alleged that Willie Moretti was suffering from advanced syphilis. The disease, if true, had gone untreated for years, reportedly progressing through its stages until it reached the tertiary phase where the spirochetes invade the central nervous system. The symptoms would have been insidious: mood swings, erratic behavior, memory lapses, outbursts of inappropriate laughter or rage. Willie's associates noticed changes. Frank Costello noticed. and according to some accounts, they tried to manage it, sent him to California for rest and treatment, malaria therapy, and heat treatments, the crude methods doctors used in the 1940s to try to suppress syphilis symptoms. Sometimes Willie would return to New Jersey appearing more clear-headed, but if the disease was indeed present, it was progressive, and by 1950 concerns were mounting about his increasingly unpredictable behavior, which made what happened next both inevitable and catastrophic. May 3, 1950. The United States Senate passed Resolution 202, establishing the Special Committee to investigate crime in interstate commerce. The chairman was Senator Estes Kefauver, a Democrat from Tennessee with presidential ambitions and a crusader's zeal. The committee's mandate was broad: investigate organized crime, its infiltration into legitimate business, its corruption of public officials, its interstate operations in gambling, narcotics, and extortion. The Kefauver hearings became a national phenomenon. The committee held sessions in 14 cities: Miami, New Orleans, Kansas City, Chicago, Detroit, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, and finally New York. More than 600 witnesses testified, and for the first time, many of these hearings were broadcast live on television. 30 million Americans tuned in. Entire cities ground to a halt. Schools dismissed students so they could watch. Blood banks ran low on donations until they installed televisions in donation centers, and suddenly donations surged. The hearings were theater, drama, a real-life crime story playing out in living rooms across America, exposing the shadowy world of organized crime to a public that had only read about it in pulp magazines and sensational newspaper stories. The committee called major mob figures to testify: Tony Accardo from Chicago, Meyer Lansky, Mickey Cohen from Los Angeles, Virginia Hill, Bugsy Siegel's former girlfriend, who kicked reporters on her way out of the hearing room, and Frank Costello, who refused to allow his face to be filmed, so the cameras focused on his hands instead, watching them twist and clench as he dodged questions, revealing the anxiety beneath his polished exterior. December 1950, Willie Moretti was called to testify. Most mobsters who appeared before the committee took the Fifth Amendment, invoking their constitutional protection against self-incrimination. They refused to answer questions, refused to even acknowledge they knew other mob figures. It was the smart play, the safe play. Willie Moretti didn't take the Fifth. He talked, not in a cooperative way. He didn't flip, didn't offer evidence against his associates, but he answered questions. According to contemporary accounts, the garrulous Moretti told jokes and generally played it up for the cameras. When asked if he was a member of the Mafia, historical records show he quipped, "What do you mean, like, do I carry a membership card that says Mafia on it?" When asked how he operated politically, he reportedly said, "I don't operate politically. If I did, I'd be a congressman." The senators may have been amused. The American public watching at home may have found him entertaining. But in the smoke-filled rooms where the commission met, where the real power brokers of organized crime made their decisions, Willie Moretti had just signed his death warrant. He'd broken omerta, the code of silence, the foundation upon which the entire mob structure rested. It didn't matter that he hadn't given up specific names or detailed operations. He'd talked. He'd made the Mafia a subject of public entertainment. He'd acknowledged, even jokingly, the existence of the organization they all swore didn't exist. And worse, he'd done it on national television, in front of 30 million witnesses. The problem wasn't just Willie's testimony, it was what his testimony represented. He was unpredictable, uncontrollable, and if his alleged syphilis was worsening, what would he say tomorrow? What would he reveal if the FBI pressured him? What secrets would spill out if his deteriorating mind lost the last vestiges of self-preservation. Vito Genovese wanted Willie dead. Genovese was a different breed of mobster than Frank Costello. Costello believed in diplomacy, in buying influence and making money through political connections and calculated corruption. Genovese believed in power, in fear, in the raw, undiluted violence that reminded people why you didn't cross the mob. Genovese had been forced to flee to Italy in 1937 to avoid murder charges, and he'd spent World War II building alliances with fascist leaders. When he returned to America in 1945, he expected to reclaim his position. Instead, he found Frank Costello firmly in control, with Willie Moretti as a key enforcer. Genovese hated that, resented Costello's diplomatic approach, saw Willie as an obstacle, and now, after the Kefauver hearings, he saw an opportunity. The commission met. The debate wasn't long. Albert Anastasia, the ruthless head of Murder Inc., agreed with Genovese. Willie was a liability. He had to go. Frank Costello and Joe Adonis, Willie's close allies, argued against it. Willie was loyal. Willie was useful. But they were outvoted. The commission authorized the hit. Years later, mob informant Joe Valachi would testify about a conversation he'd had with Vito Genovese regarding Willie Moretti's murder. According to Valachi, Genovese had described it as a mercy killing. Said Willie was sick, losing his mind. "The Lord have mercy on his soul," Genovese allegedly said. "He's losing his mind." It was a convenient narrative, the benevolent Don putting down a suffering friend, ending Willie's pain while protecting the organization. But the truth was colder. Willie Moretti wasn't killed because he was sick. He was killed because he'd become inconvenient, because he represented a crack in the wall of silence the mob had spent decades building. Because in a world where loyalty was everything, he'd laughed on national television and made the senators smile. October 4th, 1951 started like any ordinary Thursday. Willie woke in his home in Hasbrook Heights, made plans to meet some associates. The location was Joe's elbow room on Palisade Avenue in Cliffside Park, a small Italian place Willie was known to frequent. Nothing fancy. Red and white checkered tablecloths, the smell of garlic and tomato sauce. A place where a man could have a quiet meal, talk business, enjoy some spaghetti. According to some accounts, Willie had been scheduled to meet with Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis that day. But that morning, Lewis reportedly woke up with the mumps. When Lewis later tried to call Willie to apologize, the story goes, he learned from the television news that his friend was dead. Whether this lunch was actually scheduled remains uncertain, but the story became part of Willie's legend. At 11:28 in the morning, Willie Moretti walked into Joe's elbow room with 4 other men. They were the only patrons in the restaurant. They sat at a table, speaking in Italian, laughing. The waitress came over to take their order. Willie joked with her in their shared native language. She smiled, wrote down what they wanted, and walked back toward the kitchen. The gunfire erupted before she reached the door. Multiple shots fired in rapid succession. The bullet struck Willie in the face and head, the aim deliberate, professional. This wasn't rage. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was an execution. By the time the waitress ran back into the dining room, Willie Moretti was on the floor, lying on his back, eyes open, blood pooling beneath his head. The 4 men he'd walked in with were gone. The door hung open. The street outside was empty. The gunman had vanished like smoke. The waitress could only tentatively identify one of the men present. The suspected shooters were believed to be connected to the Genovese organization, but no arrests were ever made. The investigation stalled immediately. Nobody saw anything. Nobody heard anything. And the few witnesses who might have known something weren't talking. The Bergen County medical examiner confirmed what everyone already knew. Willie Moretti was dead. Cause of death: multiple gunshot wounds to the face and head. Some mob historians later claimed the shots to Willie's face were a sign of respect, a nod to his long service. Others said it was simply efficient, a message delivered with bullets. The reaction in the underworld was mixed. Willie had been well liked, even by people who thought he talked too much. He was generous, funny, loyal to his friends, but he'd broken the code. And in a business built on fear and silence, that couldn't stand. Frank Costello was devastated. Willie had been his cousin, his trusted enforcer, his strength. Years later, Joseph Bonanno would describe Willie Moretti's relationship to Frank Costello in terms that Mario Puzo would echo in The Godfather. Willie was Costello's strength, much like Luca Brasi was to Don Vito Corleone, the loyal enforcer whose mere presence kept enemies in check. With Willie gone, Costello's position weakened. Vito Genovese, sensing opportunity, maneuvered himself into greater power within the family. It was the beginning of the end for Costello's reign. 6 years later, in May 1957, Genovese would order Vincent the Chin Gigante to kill Costello. Gigante ambushed Costello in the lobby of his apartment building, shooting him in the head, but the bullet only grazed Costello's skull. He survived. And rather than fight a war he knew he couldn't win, Costello retired, ceding control of the family to Genovese. The Luciano family officially became the Genovese family. Vito had won. October 7, 1951. 3 days after his death, Willie Moretti was laid to rest. His funeral service was conducted at Corpus Christi Church in Hasbrouck Heights. He was buried at St. Michael's Cemetery in South Hackensack. Over 5,000 mourners attended. The crowd was so large, so chaotic, that police had to be called in to manage traffic and keep order. It was a circus. Reporters, photographers, curious onlookers, mobsters in expensive suits standing next to priests in black cassocks. Flowers piled 6 feet high. A testament to how many lives Willie had touched, how many people owed him favors, how much his charm had masked the violence of the world he inhabited. Frank Sinatra didn't attend. Neither did Dean Martin or Jerry Lewis. Whether it was fear of association, grief, or simple pragmatism, the celebrities Willie had helped stayed away. But the mob came out. Every major family sent representatives. It was a show of respect, an acknowledgement that whatever Willie had done, however he died, he'd been one of them. Willie Moretti's death marked a turning point. The Kefauver hearings continued through 1951, exposing the reach of organized crime, the corruption of public officials, the vast sums of money flowing through illegal gambling and narcotics. The hearings led to reforms, new laws, increased FBI attention. J. Edgar Hoover, who'd spent years denying the existence of a national crime syndicate, was finally forced to admit it existed and commit resources to fighting it. The revelations from the Kefauver Committee, combined with continued law enforcement pressure and high-profile mob violence like Willie's murder, eventually contributed to broader legislative reforms. In 1970, nearly 2 decades after Willie's death, Congress passed the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO. While Willie's murder wasn't a direct cause of RICO, the climate of awareness created by the Kefauver hearings and subsequent investigations helped pave the way for laws that would eventually give prosecutors powerful new tools to dismantle organized crime by targeting entire criminal enterprises rather than just individual criminals. But in the immediate aftermath of Willie's murder, the message was clear. The mob still had teeth. Talk, and you die. Cooperate with authorities, even in the most superficial way, and you die. Charm won't save you. Friendship won't save you. Decades of loyal service won't save you. The only thing that saves you is silence. Willie Moretti's story became a cautionary tale within the mob, whispered in dark corners and smoky back rooms. He was the man who smiled too much, talked too much, believed too much in his own invincibility. He thought his charm was armor. He thought his connections were protection. He was wrong. His legacy extended beyond the underworld. The alleged Tommy Dorsey incident with Frank Sinatra became part of American mythology, immortalized in The Godfather as the horsehead scene. Willie's image appeared briefly in the 2015 AMC series The Making of the Mob. New York, his character a reminder of a different era, when organized crime was building empires and the law was still learning how to fight back. In Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather, an authentic crime scene photo of Willie Moretti's body appears briefly during the montage sequence showing the hits on the 5 families. A split-second cameo. A ghost from a real war haunting a fictional one. In the Sopranos episode D-Girl, Christopher Moltisanti tells Jon Favreau the Moretti-Dorsey story, explicitly citing it as inspiration for the Fontaine subplot in The Godfather. The restaurant where Willie died, Joe's Elbow Room on Palisade Avenue in Cliffside Park, is long gone now. Reportedly the present-day site of Villa Amalfi restaurant. The Palisades still drop away toward the Hudson. Manhattan still glitters across the water. But the world Willie Moretti knew has vanished. The mobsters he ran with are dead or in prison. The politicians he bought are forgotten. The clubs where Sinatra sang and Martin and Lewis joked are shuttered or demolished. But the lesson remains. Willie Moretti wasn't killed by his enemies. He was killed by his family, by the men he'd worked beside for decades, by the organization he'd helped build and protect. Because in the end, the mob doesn't care about loyalty. It cares about survival. And when you become a threat to that survival, when your voice becomes too loud or your mind becomes too unpredictable, they will sit you down at a table in a quiet restaurant on a Thursday morning, and they will put bullets in your face while you're still smiling. That's the price of membership in a world with no rules except one: never talk. Willie Moretti talked. And at 11:28 on the morning of October 4th, 1951, in a small Italian restaurant overlooking the Hudson River, the bill came due.